Psalm 3 was written on what was arguably the worst day of David's life. A day when his own son had taken up arms against him and declared himself king and instigated an armed rebellion and stolen some of David's best and closest advisors and friends. And we've asked the question, if David was brave, if David was strong, if David was a slayer of giants and of thousands of enemy soldiers, if that is who David is, why did he run from Absalom? If I were making that movie, if I were making a movie of that day, I would start with an opening shot of a messenger, panicked and out of breath, running up a hill, tearing into the palace, running around from room to room, trying to find David, finally finding him and blurting out his message. Absalom has started an uprising and he's coming. Absalom is coming. And David, with that first moment of shock on his face, wondering, what do I do? What does this mean? What do I do next? Looking out the window of his palace, scanning the hill across the way, looking for any sign of troop movement. Is he coming now? Do I have time? And seeing that is clear, letting his gaze drop to the city itself, seeing the houses and the markets and the streets filled with men and women and children who had no idea what was happening. And David picturing what Absalom's army will do to that city in order to get to David. If I were making that movie of that day, my next scene would be one of David walking quickly, shouting orders, moving from room to room, facing down those first stunned silences and saying, "Get ready, we're leaving." And then moving on, leaving behind himself just an explosion of organization, of packing and rounding up kids and directing servants and deciding what and who to leave behind. If I were making that movie of that day, I would include an overhead traveling shot of the evacuation, with David at the front still giving orders, still making plans, but staying in front, leading his people through the city, guessing maybe that if Absalom anticipates David's actions, he might try to block the exit from the city, and David needs to be the first in line to meet him. Guessing maybe that the narrow streets of the city, his people are safest behind him. Guessing maybe that most people don't know why the king and his family are leaving, and it's better that way. David leading his wives and children and servants and supporters and military forces, trying to get to the gates, to get to the way out, the way to open spaces and wilderness and the salt flats and the Jordan River and a chance at survival, and just hoping that Absalom doesn't get to the gate first. If I were making that movie, I would pause on a shot of David stepping through the gate and looking around, and then walking to the last house just beyond the edge of town and stopping and stepping off the road, looking around still for any sign of ambush and seeing nothing, and gathering his courage and taking a deep breath and smiling as he waves on past his wives and his children. Keep on down the road. Go, go. His servants, go, go. His armed men, go. Keep on going. David waiting until the last straggler and the last soldier has gone ahead before he himself follows, watching over his shoulder, guessing maybe that once they're out of the city, Absalom's more likely to catch up with them from behind. And David needs to be the last in line to meet him. The first time we meet David, he's a shepherd. He's a boy called in from the fields by his dad with his sling tucked into his belt and oil under his fingernails and dust in his hair, smelling like sheep. And now, years, decades later, David, King David, husband, father, soldier, killer David, is still a shepherd, providing for his flock. Why did David run? He ran so that they would follow. They knew his voice. They knew that he would lead when they needed to be led, and they followed. They knew that he would bring up the rear when the rear is where the danger lies, that he would stand between them and the predator, that he would be the target, that he would be the bait. So David had to run. If I were making that movie, the next scene would be of David walking and weeping and barefoot, breathing in the dust of those who had gone ahead but who depended on him, walking, weeping down into the Kidron Valley, down away from the holy mountain, the place where God's presence was most closely found, and up again, up the slope of the Mount of Olives, where once he had worshipped Yahweh, God, but where he could not even pause today. And then again down and down and down into the dusk, into the sunset, with his mind full of words and questions, until finally he has to pull himself together, walk back in among his people and be their shepherd. If I were making that movie of that day, my closing scene would be of the stars in the sky and the sound of the Jordan River, the comfort of the narrow strip of green between the burning hot salt flats and the cool of the water, smells of food and a fire burning, throwing its light on a circle of exhausted people with just enough energy to eat and to worry. And then out of the darkness, David would walk into the crowd, through the circle of people who were here because of him, carrying his harp, carrying his courage. In my movie, David would stand near the fire where everyone would be able to see him, and he would begin to sing. He would sing his fear. "O Lord, my enemies are so many. And what if God doesn't help?" He would sing his faith, his shield, his hope, and the voice that still echoes from that faraway, high, and holy place. He would sing knowing that Absalom and his troops were in the city, taking over everything and everyone that David's people had had to leave behind. But he would sing his trust in Yahweh into the hearts, the shaken hearts of those who trusted him. I can lie down and sleep. I will wake again. I can lie down and sleep. I will wake again. I can lie down and sleep. I will wake again, because Yahweh sustains me. In my movie of that day, David, the shepherd, sings his exhausted flock to their rest.